Welcome to Medill Newsmakers. I'm your host, Brianna Williams. In the past few years, we've seen an increased concern about brain health in sports. When it comes to hits in the head and safety measures, many tend to think football. But what about combat sports? These everyday fighters that aren't on the big screen? Well, that's when it starts to get tricky. It's hard to determine how many people actually suffer injuries during the fights without detailed stats being reported from the UFC. In the last 6 years, the average number of players that had a concussion in the NFL was 14%. Although, in a private study done between 2006 and 2012, an average of 31.9% of UFC MMA fighters had a concussion during that time period.
I actually got a concussion from a guy from kicking me in the head.
My last fight, I took a bunch of blows to the head.
I had a concussion, I'd say 3 months ago.
These fighters are all training in the state of Illinois. Since the Ali Act was enacted in May 2000, states that allow matches are required to have a commission regulating these events. This is to ensure the safety of so many fighting on a local level with hopes to go pro. Just last year, there were 1,000 MMA fighters and around 20,000 professional boxers in the world. According to a study done by the Brain Surgery Institute, 87% of all professional boxers sustained a brain injury during the span of their career. Illinois Boxing Hall of Fame member Rita Figueroa is a part of the majority. Over 8 years ago, Figueroa had a life-saving emergency head surgery after colliding heads with an opponent during a boxing match. This forced her to put the boxing gloves down and pick the hand mittens up.
Double.
I had the chance to sit down with Figueroa in the studio to talk about her injury and life after the fight. Can you tell me a little bit about that day as far as what you can remember?
Well, we were fighting and it was going well, and we headbutted and I kept fighting. I knew something was wrong because I felt, it's funny, I tell people I felt like my eyes were like a slot machine, like I would get hit. It was like, went in the back, started getting sick, had a super bad headache, and they just took me from there.
After the surgery, the initial surgery, what kind of problems did you have following it?
There were some times that I couldn't talk. I would go to talk, but nothing would come out. There's a lot of things I don't remember. I used to sleep really, really well, and now I just don't sleep well at all, but, I'll take that. And there's a few things that, like my writing's different, my depth perception sometimes is different.
So what risks did you know could come about when you began boxing originally?
Well, it's boxing. It's a combat sport. So there's, if you go into boxing thinking nothing's ever going to happen, it's kind of foolish. You're getting punched in the face. You're getting punched in the head repetitively. So, to go in thinking nothing's ever going to happen, I think is just foolish.
So if you worked for the Illinois Boxing Commission, what would be the immediate changes that you would make?
The first thing I would do is I would have a doctor go into the ring and check both fighters' eyes immediately after a fight, or when they walk out of the ring. That doesn't happen. Why not? You could check a fighter's pupils in 2 seconds and catch something or not.
Since Figueroa's incident, the Illinois Boxing Association requires 2 ambulances to be at every boxing match. After the break, one fighter will tell us of his health concerns after fighting for years. And I'll talk to one neurologist that's been studying fighters' brains for years. Stay tuned.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Northwestern break right through that with our colors flying. We will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
After 6 title belts and competing for over 20 years, retired MMA fighter Brian Gassaway has seen the effects MMA fighting can do to the brain.
I've had them, and I just kind of fought through them, so it's at least 50, I would say. Some were worse than others. I think it's more noticeable now. Say in the past few years, I've had a few bad ones. Like even driving at night, the headlights, it would hurt, just to drive. It's very irritating. I can't really sleep, headaches, thought process is not there. It's like you have a really bad cold, and it's like you're speaking and you know what you want to say and it just doesn't come out. Like there's some disconnect, of your mind.
Now, at the age of 46 and an estimated 50 concussions, Gasaway is a part of a brain health study sponsored by the UFC.
In the fighter study, I actually joined the Center for Brain Health team at the Cleveland Clinic in the summer of 2016. I essentially just helped out with all of the various studies that we had going on. Actually running the research visits versus a longitudinal study. So we have participants come in each year for up to 4 years. It could be longer if they decide to continue to help out after.
With us here we have Dr. Bernick, a neurologist at the Cleveland Clinic Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health in Las Vegas, Nevada. He began the fighter study Brian Gasaway is currently participating in 7 years ago. Thank you, Dr. Bernick, for joining us.
No, thank you.
Can you explain what CTE is?
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, we believe, is a degenerative brain disease. So it's launched by repetitive head trauma, but at some point in some people, this initial injury to the brain, its first description of CTE was in fighters and boxers. This was back in 1928, and at that time, boxers would, fight almost all the time, and they'd brawl, and they'd have just a tremendous amount of exposure. So things have changed, and whether fighters are any more vulnerable to CTE than football players or bronco riders or hockey players, nobody really knows. Probably what we do know is that the more you get hit on the head over time, the more likely you are to develop some of these long-term complications.
In like the 1920s, people were discovering CTE. Would you describe that as boxer's brain or punch drunk, as a lot of people call it now? Would that all be in the same realm?
Absolutely. I think the feeling is that what was described as punch drunk in the initial publication and description is actually what we see now as CTE. Certainly the severity is probably different, and fighters do have different symptoms than retired NFL players, for example, but we think the underlying process is still the same.
Stay tuned. After the break, we'll see how some MMA fighters are fighting to keep the new generation of combat fighters safe. And one neurosurgeon will tell us the future of brain health in sports.
Why hang around waiting for opportunity to knock when instead you can track opportunity down and knock on its door? You might ask, what's the best way to identify where opportunity lives? Here's a hint. Its door is colored purple. Northwestern University. Opportunity awaits your knock.
Why spend your entire life looking for some on-ramp to the road to opportunity when there's already a well-traveled path? So you may be wondering, what does that path look like? Is it paved with gold? Well, here's a hint. It's actually paved with purple. Northwestern University. Your road starts here.
In 2017 alone, an estimated 2.5 million high school students reported having at least one concussion. That's no surprise, considering many karate dojos will accept kids at the age of 4. But one local karate studio owner in Chicago emphasizes both safety and MMA fighter and studio owner in the South Loop. He emphasizes safety and shows how combat sports don't always have to be dangerous.
When we do our sparring, we hit from the neck down, right? So at least punches. You can still kick to the head, but it's much more difficult to kick somebody in the head than it is to punch somebody in the head. And when people are beginners, they don't necessarily have control. Nay! That's why I really believe in the style of karate we do, because the kids don't punch each other in the face, and I think it's a huge thing. We do our katas.
Today there's a new generation of fighters, but the same risks are still there. With so many head injuries in different sports, doctors are creating more and more studies to get to the root of the problem.
It seems like it, and this is still a relatively new field. The first published study about traumatic encephalopathy or chronic head trauma was done in 2005. So it hasn't been published for decades. We're just starting to learn, what the impact of early injuries and repetitive injuries is on kids and adults.
Where we're positioned well is to really understand the natural history of CTE. That is, looking at how people transition from just the acute injuries that they get to this long progressive disease. And unfortunately, even though we've gone 7 years, it seems like a long time, we probably have to go another 7 years to really follow individuals from that active point to when they retire, and then go on for some time after that. So it's not going to be an easy thing to determine right away. We have work to do, but I think we're starting to accumulate at least more information, which we haven't had for almost 100 years.
As a new generation of fighters begin, the risks remain the same. More people are becoming aware of head injuries, and as technology advances and research increases, solutions are trying to be found. Whether it's boxer's brain or CTE, the disease is still the same. After all, the awareness of the person doesn't affect the reality of the injury. In Chicago, I'm Brianna Williams. Thanks for watching.